Hey everyone, Sarah here. Rewind Justice brings you revenge stories that will blow your mind. If you're ready, hit subscribe and let's go.
There is a particular cruelty that lives inside politeness. Not the cruelty of raised voices or slammed doors. Those at least are honest. I mean the kind that arrives in a text message with correct punctuation. The kind that says Rachel's hosting and she needs this to go well, as though that sentence doesn't contain a complete verdict about who matters and who doesn't. My name is Lauren Voss. I'm 34 years old. I have a master's degree in business administration from the University of Michigan, a consulting firm I built from a folding table in a studio apartment, and a 60% silent ownership stake in a catering company valued at $4.2 million, a company my sister believes she built entirely by herself. I want to explain how that happened. But first I need to explain Rachel. Rachel Voss, Rachel Calloway now, after her marriage to Brendan 3 years ago, is 2 years younger than me and has always existed in a different atmosphere within our family. Not because she's more talented, not because she worked harder, but because Rachel performs her life in a way that our parents understand and reward. She is warm at the right moments, ambitious in the right language, and strategic enough to position herself as the protagonist of every room she enters without anyone quite noticing the positioning. I'm not those things. I am direct when politeness would serve me better. I am quiet when enthusiasm is expected. I analyze rooms rather than perform in them, which has always read, to my mother especially, as a character flaw rather than a disposition. Growing up in the Voss house meant existing inside my mother's very specific vision of what daughters should be. Carol Voss was not a cruel woman by intention. She was a woman who loved her children in proportion to how well they confirmed her image of them. Rachel confirmed it effortlessly. I disrupted it constantly without meaning to, simply by being built differently. By the time I left for college, I had absorbed the family's assessment of me so thoroughly that I spent my first year at Michigan trying to determine whether it was true. Whether I really did make things awkward. Whether my presence really did create friction that would otherwise not exist. What I eventually concluded, after the kind of slow private accounting that happens when no one is watching, was that I wasn't creating friction. I was simply not smoothing it. I was not doing the invisible labor of making other people comfortable at my own expense. And in a family where that labor was expected and rewarded, my refusal to perform it read as a problem. I graduated. I got a job at a management consulting firm in Chicago. I got good at it. I got very good at it. And at 27 I started my own practice, Voss Advisory Group, working with small and mid-sized businesses on structure, capital strategy and operational efficiency. The money was not immediate. The first 2 years were difficult in the way that building something real is always difficult. Not dramatic, just relentless. I took every client who came to me, charged fees that kept me functional rather than comfortable, and built the practice in the margins of a life that left very little margin. My family knew I had a consulting firm the same way they knew the neighbor down the street had a consulting firm, as background information unexamined requiring no further inquiry. Then came Rachel's catering company. And everything changed invisibly. Rachel launched Prestige Catering Group in the spring 5 years ago. She had been working as an event coordinator for a hotel chain, had cultivated real relationships with corporate clients, and had a genuine eye for presentation. The concept was solid. The timing was good. What she did not have was capital. He asked my parents first. Dad offered $15,000. Meaningful to him, not sufficient for what she was describing. She asked her husband Brendan, who was supportive in the abstract but cautious with their joint finances. She asked 2 friends who each put in $5,000 for equity she couldn't really afford to give away at that stage. He did not ask me. She had never in our adult lives asked me for anything, not because she was too proud, but because I don't think it occurred to her that I might have something useful to give. I found out about Prestige Catering Group through my mother, who mentioned it the way she mentioned most of Rachel's ventures, with the particular brightness she reserved for Rachel's news, as distinct from the measured interest she applied to mine. Rachel's starting a catering company, isn't that exciting? As though it were weather. As though I weren't sitting right there. I looked into it afterward privately the way I look into most things. I found Rachel's preliminary business registration, her initial client list through a mutual contact, her pitch materials which a colleague forwarded to me without knowing the connection. What I saw was a good idea with a capital problem and an operational structure that would collapse under scale. I could fix both. The question was whether to surface myself or stay behind the glass. I had been behind the glass my entire life, watching my family through the window, never quite inside the frame. Part of me wanted to step through. To call Rachel to say, I see what you're building and I can help, let me help. To be the sister who showed up. But I had tried that before. Smaller versions of it. Suggestions that were received as criticisms. Offers that were heard as condescension. The family system had a grammar to it, and in that grammar, Lauren helping Rachel meant Lauren inserting herself where she didn't belong. So I stayed behind the glass. But this time I brought capital with me. I contacted Rachel's initial business attorney, a solo practitioner named Greg Marsh who I knew through a mutual colleague, and arranged a meeting that did not include Rachel. I structured a silent ownership position through a holding entity, PCG Capital Partners LLC, that would inject $380,000 into Prestige Catering Group in exchange for 60% equity, silent, non-voting on operational matters, with a buyout clause available to Rachel at any point after year 3 at a formula valuation. Greg presented it to Rachel as an interested angel investor who preferred anonymity. This is not unusual in small business financing. Silent investors exist across every industry, and many prefer operational distance for entirely legitimate reasons. Rachel asked questions. Greg answered them. She signed. Prestige Catering Group had its capital. Over the next 5 years I did not attend a single event. I did not advise on a single menu. I did not once call Rachel to discuss the business. What I did through PCG Capital Partners was provide 2 additional capital injections when Rachel needed them. One at year 2 for equipment, one at year 3 for a second event vehicle, and retain my equity position as the company grew. By this Thanksgiving, Prestige Catering Group was valued at $4.2 million. My 60% stake was worth approximately $2.52 million on paper. Rachel believed she had built it herself. Her husband believed it. My parents, who attended the launch party and told everyone about their daughter the entrepreneur, believed it. The family narrative was complete and consistent and entirely missing me as family narratives involving me tended to be. I had stopped being surprised by that. I had stopped mostly minding. Then came the text message. My mother's text arrived on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving at 11:47 in the morning. I was in a client meeting. I glanced at it, set my phone face down, finished the meeting, then read it properly. Don't come this year, Lauren. Rachel's hosting and she needs this to go well. You know how things get. Followed 12 minutes later by a message from my father's phone, which meant my mother had asked him to send it, or had sent it herself from his phone, which she occasionally did when she wanted the message to carry more authority than she felt her own name provided. You always make things awkward. Let your sister have this one. I sat at my desk for a while. Let your sister have this one. As though Thanksgiving were a trophy. As though the question of who attended a family holiday was a competitive event with a winner and a loser, and my presence somewhere in the standings was a threat to Rachel's position. I thought about what my mother didn't know. I thought about $380,000 wired in year 1. I thought about PCG Capital Partners LLC. I thought about Greg Marsh, who had structured everything so cleanly that there was genuinely no visible thread connecting Lauren Voss to Prestige Catering Group unless you knew precisely where to look. I thought about 5 years of silence. I thought about you always make things awkward and let your sister have this one, and then I stopped thinking and I opened my email. I wrote to James Whitfield, my attorney who had taken over the PCG structure from Greg Marsh 2 years prior. James, please initiate dissolution of PCG Capital Partners LLC's ownership position in Prestige Catering Group. I want to liquidate the full 60% stake. Formal notice to be sent to all registered stakeholders per the operating agreement. Please move on this today. I reread it once. Then I hit send. Then I replied to my mother's text. Understood. 2 letters. The period was intentional. James called me within the hour. Lauren. His voice had the measured quality of a man who wanted to ask a personal question but was going to frame it professionally. I want to make sure I understand the instruction correctly. Full dissolution. Formal notice to all stakeholders. That includes the operating partner, Rachel Calloway. It does, I said. She'll learn about the ownership position when notice is served. She will. Pause. Is there a timeline you'd prefer? I thought about it. Rachel was hosting Thanksgiving on Thursday. Her business partner, A woman named Diane Souza, who handled the operations side while Rachel managed client relationships, was a registered stakeholder under the operating agreement and would receive formal notice simultaneously. Standard processing, I said. Whatever the operating agreement requires. That's 48 hours from notice of intent. So if I file today, notice goes out Thursday. Thanksgiving. Rachel hosting my family assembled the event she needed to go well. That works, I said. Lauren. Another pause. You've held this position for 5 years without surfacing. Are you certain? I looked out my office window at the November sky, flat and white the way Chicago gets in late fall. The position was always mine to hold or release, I said. I'm releasing it. Understood. I'll file this afternoon. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I made 2 more calls, to Simone, my closest friend who had known about the PCG position since year 2, and to my colleague David Park, who had been asking for months whether I'd ever considered expanding Voss Advisory Group's client base into the events and hospitality sector. I told David we should have coffee the following week. I thought I might have a referral for him. Then I booked a table at a restaurant I'd been meaning to try for months. A new French place in Lincoln Park with a 4-week wait that a client had gotten me into. Thanksgiving service, 7 p.m. table for 1. I had a book I'd been trying to finish for 6 weeks. I had a glass of Burgundy in mind. I intended to have a very good evening. I was on my 2nd glass of wine and page 200 of my book when my phone lit up. Not Rachel. Not yet. Diane Souza. Diane was Rachel's operational partner, the woman who had been with Prestige since month 4, who handled vendor contracts, staffing, logistics, and the operational infrastructure that Rachel's client relationships depended on entirely. She had a direct, no-nonsense manner that I had always respected from a distance. I had never spoken to her. He did not know who I was. Until 48 hours ago when James's formal notice had arrived in her inbox with the full disclosure package, including the identity of PCG Capital Partners LLC's principal. I let it ring once. Then I picked up. Miss Souza, I said. A beat of silence. You're Lauren Voss. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was something that sounded like a woman recalibrating rapidly. Rachel's sister. Yes. You've owned 60% of this company for 5 years. Yes. Another beat. She has no idea. She didn't know. I heard Diane exhale. Not in anger but in the way of someone processing a significant piece of new information in real time. The notice says you're dissolving the position. That's correct. Ms. Voss. Her voice shifted into something more direct. Liquidating your stake triggers the buyout clause. Rachel would need to either purchase your equity or the company goes to market valuation proceedings. She doesn't have that capital. I'm aware of the mechanism, I said. James Whitfield will be in touch with options. There are paths forward that don't require Rachel to raise capital immediately. I've instructed him to present them. Pause. Why are you telling me this on Thanksgiving? I'm not telling you anything. You received formal notice through proper channels. You called me. Fair point. I could hear something almost like a wry acknowledgement in her voice. She's in the middle of hosting a dinner right now. Her whole family is there. I know, I said. A brief silence. Then Diane said more quietly, Are you going to talk to her? When she calls me, I said. She'll call. She will, Diane agreed. And then, as if she couldn't quite help herself, for what it's worth, I looked at the original capital injection. The structure. Whoever advised on it did excellent work. Thank you, I said. I set my phone on the table and picked up my book. I read for approximately 6 minutes. Then Rachel called. I had imagined this call in various forms over 5 years. I had not anticipated the particular sound of her voice when it came, not anger which I had prepared for, but something much more disorienting. She sounded like a person who had just discovered that a room they had lived in for years had a false wall, and behind it, a window they had never known was there. Lauren. Her voice was careful, as though she was afraid of what came out if she wasn't. Rachel. Diane she showed me the notice. Pause. She showed me the full disclosure package. Okay. You own 60% of my company. Not a question. Sentence she was testing the weight of. I did, I said. As of this morning, the dissolution process is in motion. James will contact you with the options. Lauren. Her voice cracked at the edges. You've owned 60% of my company for 5 years and never said a word. No. Why? I looked at the candle on my table. Small flame very still in the indoor air. Because you were building something, I said. I didn't want to be in the way of that. You weren't in the way. You were the foundation. Her voice was doing something complicated. The $380,000. Year 2 the equipment loan. Year 3 the van. That was all you. Through PCG, yes. I told Brendan we got lucky with investors. A short strange sound, not quite a laugh. I told Mom and Dad I had great instincts about capital partners. I told myself I had built this. You did build it, I said. The clients are yours. The vision is yours. The reputation is yours. I provided capital structure. You provided everything that made it worth capitalizing. Silence on her end. A long one. Then in a different voice, quieter, less defended, Mom told you not to come. She did. Today. She told you not to come today, and that's when you... I made the decision this afternoon, I said. The timing of the notice is per the operating agreement. I didn't arrange it. A beat. We both knew that was technically accurate and not the whole picture, and the silence acknowledged it without pressing on it. They're all here, Rachel said quietly. Mom, Dad, Brendan's parents. Diane called me out of the dining room. They all think I stepped out to handle a work issue. Another pause. I don't know how to go back in there. You go back in, I said. You finish dinner. You call James Whitfield tomorrow morning. There are options that protect the business. You don't need to solve this tonight. Lauren. Her voice was very careful now. Very deliberate. Why did you do this in the first place? 5 years ago. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about that for a moment. The real answer had several layers and I chose the truest one. Because I didn't think you'd accept it from me, I said. And I wanted the company to exist more than I needed credit for it. The silence that followed was different from the others. It had more space in it. I'm going to need to think about all of this, Rachel said finally. Take your time. Where are you tonight? A restaurant in Lincoln Park. I'm having a very good evening. Pause. You're at a restaurant. Alone. On Thanksgiving. With a good book and a good burgundy, yes. Something shifted in her voice. Something I hadn't heard from Rachel in a very long time. Something that sounded like it might be seeing me clearly. That's very you, she said. Not unkindly. For the first time in longer than I could measure, not unkindly at all. Go finish dinner, I said. Okay. Pause. Lauren. We'll talk this week, I said. There's time. I ended the call, set my phone face down and picked up my book. Tyler, our cousin, texted me later that night. He'd heard through the family grapevine faster than I'd expected. He sent a single message. I heard. Are you okay? I replied, better than okay. How's the pie? He sent back a laughing emoji and then Rachel came back to the table and didn't say a word for 20 minutes. Your mom kept asking if the food was all right. Your dad went very quiet. I read that 3 times. Then I put my phone away and finished my chapter. The calls started Friday morning. First my mother at 8:42 a.m. before I had finished my coffee. Her voice had the quality of someone who had been awake for a long time constructing what they were going to say and still hadn't quite gotten there. Lauren. Pause. Rachel told us last night. About the company. About what you've been doing for 5 years. Hey, I said. Why didn't you tell us? I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. Would it have changed anything, Mom? A longer pause. What do you mean? The text you sent Tuesday. Would knowing about PCG Capital Partners have changed what you wrote? The silence stretched. My mother was not a dishonest woman. She was a woman who preferred not to examine certain things directly, and I was asking her to examine something directly. I don't know, she said finally. Which was from Carol Voss, a form of honesty. I do, I said. Not harshly. Just clearly. It would have changed the calculus. But it shouldn't have needed to. That's the part one wants you to think about. She was quiet for a long moment. Your father wants to talk to you. Tell him to call me when he's ready. I'm not going anywhere. Dad called at noon. His approach was different from my mother's. More lateral, less willing to address the center of it directly. He asked about the company, about the capital structure, about how I had found the opportunity. He asked about Voss Advisory Group in a way that suggested he was encountering it as a real entity for the first time, rather than as vague background noise. At the end he said, "I didn't know you had done all this." "No one asked," I said. "Voss. I'm asking now." "I know, Dad." Kept my voice even. "We can start there." Rachel called Saturday afternoon. This call was different from Thursday night. That one had been shock, raw and unprocessed. This one had been slept on, sat with, turned over. Her voice was steadier and more complicated. "I talked to James Whitfield," she said. "He walked me through the options." "Good. There's a restructuring path that keeps the business intact. I would buy out the PCG position over 5 years at formula valuation. He said you've already agreed to a favorable rate. The business shouldn't suffer because of a family situation," I said. She stopped. "That's very generous. It's practical." Pause. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Did you enjoy it? Watching Prestige grow and knowing you were part of it and no one." She stopped again. I thought about it honestly. "Sometimes," I said. "Sometimes it was enough to know the thing existed. Sometimes it was harder than I expected." "I should have asked you," she said quietly. 5 years ago when I was trying to raise capital. I should have thought to ask you. I didn't think. You didn't think I had anything to offer," I said. "Not as an indictment. Just as a fact." "No." Her voice was steady. "I didn't. And that says something about how I'd been looking at you that I'm not proud of." I didn't rush to fill the silence. "Diane likes you," Rachel said finally. "She said you were direct and fair on the phone. She said she hoped we'd work something out." Pause. "She also said whoever structured the original deal did exceptional work. She mentioned that to me as well." "That was you." "It was." Another pause. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was careful in a new way, careful the way of someone choosing words that cost them something. "I want to understand what you've built. Voss Advisory Group. All of it. I want to actually ask and actually listen. A beat. If you're willing." I looked out my window. November in Chicago, bare trees, flat sky. "I'm willing," I said. We met for coffee the following Thursday. Not Thanksgiving. The Thursday after, a regular week in December when the city was starting to put up lights and the coffee shops were playing music nobody had asked for yet. Rachel was already there when I arrived. She had a notebook open. She had written things in it before I sat down, which surprised me. Rachel was not a person who prepared for informal conversations. The notebook meant she had thought about what she wanted to say and was afraid she'd get to the table and find the words had gone somewhere she couldn't reach. I recognized the instinct. I had spent a lifetime preparing for conversations that might go sideways. We talked for 3 hours. She asked about Voss Advisory Group. The real questions, the structural ones, how I had built the client base, how I had financed the early years. What the practice looked like now. She asked about PCG Capital Partners, about how I had structured the original investment, about the instinct that had made me do it anonymously rather than surface myself. I told her the truth about that. "I didn't think you'd accept it from me," I said again. "And I've spent a long time in this family not being believed. I didn't want to risk the company on whether you'd believe me." She looked at the table when I said that. "That's on me," she said. "It's on both of us," I said. I could have tried harder to be visible. I chose the path of least resistance, which was invisibility. "That's not entirely your failure." "Still." She looked up. "I want to fix it. The way I see you. I want to actually look." I believed her. Not completely, not with the trust that takes years to build rather than one coffee conversation, but enough to begin. That was what I had learned in 5 years of watching from behind the glass. Beginnings were where the real decisions lived. Everything else was just continuation. The buyout structure James had designed was signed 3 weeks later. Rachel would acquire the PCG equity position over 5 years. The business would continue operating exactly as it had, except that Rachel now knew who had been behind it, and the knowledge sat between us differently than the secrecy had. Prestige Catering Group booked their largest corporate contract in January. A 3-year deal with a Chicago-based financial services firm for all company events. Diane called to tell me, which surprised me. We had spoken twice since Thanksgiving, both times briefly, both times leaving me with the impression of a woman who was filing information away for future use. Thought you'd want to know, she said. Given the history. Congratulations to both of you, I said. Rachel worked for that contract for 8 months, Diane said. She's good at this. I know, I said. I've been watching for 5 years. Pause. Then Diane said, for what it's worth, she talks about you differently now. Since Thanksgiving. How so? Like you're someone worth knowing, Diane said simply. Seems like that's new. I thought about my mother's text. You always make things awkward. I thought about my father's addendum. I thought about 5 years of payments flowing silently through PCG Capital Partners LLC into a company my family had never associated with me for a single second. It is, I said. But it's a start. I hung up. I made myself another coffee. I opened my laptop and pulled up the new client intake form I'd been working on. Voss Advisory Group was expanding, 2 new hires in the spring, a second office under consideration. Outside my window, Chicago in January, gray and absolutely itself. I had spent 34 years making myself small enough to fit inside other people's idea of who I was. The thing I was learning, slowly, imperfectly, without any dramatic announcement, was that the space I took up was mine to decide. Not loud. Not performed. Just present. Just entirely, finally mine.